This is a frame. This is also a frame. Yeah, this is a frame as well, but not the one I mean. Oh yeah, this is a frame. Now let's try showing multiple frames per second. Alright, this is 5 frames per second. Let's try 10. Okay, now let's bump up the frame rate another good portion and try 25 frames per second.
Alright, this is looking smooth.
A frame is basically a still image, a photo you could say. Videos consist of multiple frames. By showing multiple pictures in a very short time, we can create the illusion of movement. The average human can process up to 10 to 12 images per second. But when the frame rate increases over that average, the brain can't process the individual images and just stitches them together to create motion. That is what we know as video. But as you can see, 13 images a second is still annoyingly tiring to watch because it's so choppy. To fix this, the frame rate needs to be increased.
This video here is shot at 25 frames per second and therefore looks totally smooth.
But not all videos we watch have a frame rate of 25 FPS. Here in Europe, 25 is the standard, but in other areas around the world this varies. The standard frame rate in the US is 30 FPS. However, most Hollywood films are shot and played at 24 FPS. For us filmmakers, frame rates are an essential setting we need to choose on the camera, but it can easily become confusing. A reasonable question often asked is when to use which frame rate and which is the best.
To answer this question, we first need to know what frame rate a camera provides.
Most modern day cameras give you a choice of multiple frame rates. Let's take the Sony a7 III as an example. For 1920 by 1080 Full HD video, the a7 III lets you shoot at 25, 50 and 100 FPS.
Please keep in mind that these are the standard frame rates here in Europe, where 25 FPS is the standard for videos. In the US, 30 FPS is the standard, and therefore the cameras provide slightly different frame rate options.
So when choosing your frame rate, you already need to know what frame rate the final video is going to be. I personally don't like the look of 30 FPS footage. Generally, 24 FPS is said to look the best, which probably is due to us being used to seeing beautiful cinematography from Hollywood in the theaters at 24 FPS. For that reason, I shoot at 25 FPS, which is close enough. When I shoot my YouTube videos, I know that these will be exported and uploaded at 25 frames per second.
That means when shooting scenes of me talking to the camera, like this one here, which will be played at normal speed, I shoot at 25 frames per second.
However, when shooting B-roll, I often like to slow down the footage to create this slow motion effect.
But when I slow down 25 FPS footage to 50%, it's then played at 12.5 frames per second, which looks terrible, and that is where the higher frame rates become relevant.
To solve this issue, you need to choose a higher frame rate, such as 100 FPS. When shooting at 100 frames per second, the camera is recording 4 times the amount of frames in 1 second compared to 25 FPS. Thus, when editing that footage, you are able to slow it down to 25% and create smooth-looking slow-motion video.
So when choosing your frame rate, it is important to already have in mind what you're going to use that shot for.
I usually switch between 25 and 100 FPS, thus skipping the 50 frames per second option. However, 50 FPS does have its advantages in certain situations. When shooting for a long period of time and I get close to filling my SD card, I might choose to shoot at 50 FPS to save some space but still have the capability to slow down the footage to 50%.
Another factor to consider is the lighting situation.
To achieve natural looking motion blur, I try to keep my shutter speed at double my frame rate at all times. So when shooting at 25 FPS, I set the shutter to 1/50th, and when shooting at 100 FPS, I set it to 1/200th of a second. But when shooting in low light, a shutter speed of 1/200th is pretty high and will cause you to increase the ISO, which decreases the video quality. Therefore, when I want to be able to slow down my footage when shooting in low light, but at the same time I want to avoid high ISO levels, I'll choose 50 FPS as a compromise, because it gives me the ability to slow down the footage and also shoot at a shutter speed of only 1/100th, which allows me to lower the ISO a little. In conclusion, frame rates are the amount of images per second a video consists of. When shooting a video, you need to choose the frame rate that fits the purpose of your video. Real-time video generally looks the best at 24 FPS, and higher frame rates are used to slow down the footage in post-production to create slow-motion video.
I hope this video could clarify your understanding of frame rates and you could find some valuable information in this video. If so, let me know by leaving a like, and if you want to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe, and hopefully see you again next week.
Thank you.